Attention, passengers. This is your co-pilot speaking. Your pilot is black-minded, so you are not going blind and there is no power failure. You are merely experiencing the immense blackness of his proximity, and when you hear his voice, you and the cabin will get even darker than you are currently. We will be cruising at the speed equal to light because the one other thing that travels equally fast is darkness. Your loved ones awaiting your arrival may not recognize you at first sight. This is normal. Simply tell them about the pilot and they will understand. We will taxi to the runway now, so please buckle up and prepare for a high-speed departure. Thank you for choosing Jet Black Airways, where the phrase Jet Black is also a verb. We hope you keep jetting black with us until the wings and the wheels fall off. Justice forever.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To some of y'all and peace out to the rest of you. Hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. Let me start off by giving a shout out to D. Smith for coming through on the Cash App again with triple digits. Thank you. That I can't thank you enough from the bottom of my black heart and from the depths of my black mind. Thank you. That's. I hope that you're not causing yourself any hardship. I hope not. I got to tell you, he's been generous, and I want to give a shout out to MLR because MLR he's not only supported me, but he has come through and supported others. And I want to give a shout out to S. Jacques for looking out for me and for others. I really hope that I'm of benefit and help. It's going to take me a while to catch up on the emails, but I haven't forgotten about y'all. I'm about 400 emails behind, by the way. So I opened this up to record, and what I'm recording about is, I'm opening this up to record about a code that we're going to need and some double standards that are going to have to be involved in it. I'm not proposing a code only for Passport Bros or just for SYSBM. Hell, SYSBM has tenets. I did not memorize them, but the reason for that is because they were already part of my routine. So that's why I don't have them memorized. I'm sure IBMOR has certain tenets, but I don't know exactly where to go to find them. But there should be some tenets and it won't have to be a bunch of them, but there do need to be some clauses in the code for the BMPT, the union of us, how we cooperate with each other, because we already tend to get along well with each other. But the question will be then, how can we make sure that we cooperate? At least become such that we cannot be utilized against each other. For that, I'd recommend one. Now, there is a code, a way to live, and I've already told you all that it is part and parcel of a comprehensive solution available and very effective for the woes of our race. I've stated this already. You already know what that is, and Israel Young Lion has accepted. Black Agent has accepted. They're not the only ones. And some may say, well, no, Black Mind, that ain't the solution. Well, if it's not, check out Mustafa Briggs, spelled with 2 G's. Look him up. You'll find certain misconceptions being corrected. There are quite a few that know about this. And I'm going to talk more about this towards the end of this particular upload. But I'm going to state first that this code is going to have some double standards in it because the matriarchy has its code and it has double standards. Its double standards are unfair. Ours would not be. Here's why. A double standard, in order to be fair, comes counterbalanced by another double standard that buttresses up against it. This makes the scales balance out. The problem is that you have double standards that don't come counterbalanced by others. So the matriarchy has now taken a sexual double standard and they've reversed it. If you lay down with multiple women, then you're an SLUT as a guy. But if you haven't done so, then you're inexperienced and you're not really a man. And so when they say all men are dogs, they really believe that if you're not a dog, you can't be a man. That's really what they're saying. And that's why I don't really believe that we should take into account what do they want when you're looking for a good guy for them. The question is, can you respect him and stay with him? If you know that your daughter or your sister doesn't really like good guys, and what you have to do is be honest with yourself and with her and say to her, the question is, can you respect him and can you stay with him? Because I already know you don't really want a good guy that's going to stay with you and respect you. You don't want him. So let's forget about if you want him. Are you prepared to stay with him even when you don't, and to respect him even when you are dazzled by this bad dude with a gun on his waist? And if you know that your sister or your daughter can't stay with any good guy, then you need to make this apparent. And if a man does come to see about marrying her, then you got to say to the man, listen, young man, I approve of you for her. I don't approve of her for you. You may not have to go and say everything, tell all the business, but you got to let the man know, oh, I approve of you for her. I just don't approve of her for you. Because if my daughters, if either of them or both of them become such that I have to say this to any man that might be a prospective son-in-law, and I got to say, I'm working on them, but I don't approve of them for you yet. I'm not here for the foolishness. None of us are. There is a financial double standard upon men, and that's why in Islam, if I pass away, my son gets twice the inheritance of either of his sisters. So he alone gets what both of his sisters from me are going to get. Now, my parents and my brother are not yet Muslim, so the question of inheritance is not a question for them. But my wife gets her share, then my children. After my wife's share, my son gets twice what either of his sisters gets. The reason is because there is another double standard. My daughters can go to him for support if they're not married, or even if they are, and they can ask for certain things and certain types of help they can ask for from him that he cannot ask for from them. They ain't got to provide nothing for him, and they ain't got to protect him from nothing. They can go to him for these things. Therefore, since both of them require that he have resources, then what that means is that he's entitled to twice the resources from whatever I leave behind. That's what that means. The husband must work, and he must spend from what he earns to take care of the wife and the children. The wife, if the husband is alive, does not have to use what she earns. She is allowed to work, but she does not have to use what she earns in the maintenance of the family. That also is a double standard. That's why when the wife says his money's our money, but my money's my money, we don't generally argue with that. And that's kind of the understanding we Muslims have now. The truth is not that literal. It's not that our money is hers, but it is that our responsibility is hers. It is to her. That's what I mean. So no, she's not entitled to just take anything we have and do whatever she wants. But we are the ones responsible to provide for her and maintain her and to protect her. That's our job. And so, since you have these things that tend to go one way, you have something else that goes the other way. We are not responsible to obey our wives. Now, they're telling us to do something that God has said, or they're saying to obey God, then we were already responsible to obey God. And so, therefore, she has made a valid point, but our obedience is to God. It is not, we're not to be obedient to our wives. If we make a promise, we are supposed to keep it. But if we obey, we already know if we obey our wives, they're not going to be our wives for very long. And if they're stuck with us, they'll just cheat. We understand this now. Those of us that are red pill aware in the black manosphere realize that that's what's going to happen. So our code is going to have to involve certain double standards. Because I have not heard of any SYSBM, IBM, or Passport Bro saying that they're entitled to a woman's obedience and provision and protection, and that they owe women nothing in exchange. We have heard regular run-of-the-mill women that don't have a title to themselves simply, and don't even claim to be feminist, simply sit up and say that men owe but are never owed, no matter what. They've expressed not only double standards, but outright contemptuous double standards for us. So we must have codes or a code, and it must involve and include some double standards. One of them is that no matter what it is that a man does, even if he is a bona fide, identified, certified Passport Bro or SYSBman or IBman OR, that we will condemn something that he does wrong because it is wrong, but we will not condemn what he does wrong for the satisfaction of the matriarchy. That's the difference. If he commits a heinous crime, we condemn him because he committed the crime, not because the victim and her gender don't like it. That's the difference. I think this is an easy one for us to meet, but we should make it an actual code. It's fair. But if someone were to say, well, you don't really have compassion for the victim, we would sit up and say, well, you don't really know that we don't have compassion for the victim. But the thing is that more important than how we feel is justice. And not how we feel about it. You see, the other thing, too, that we would say to them is that because women's emotions and feelings are all over the place anyway, even when we're right, we have to focus on justice more so than how she feels, because because God is always right. Justice is just, and oppression is always wrong. That's what we would have to do. That's what we would have to say. That would have to be our stance. Another one is that if we are not sure of a man's affiliation with any one of the stripes of BMPT, then we do not hold L's for what they go through or for what happens to them. I talked about how we can certify BMPTs in the future, but you got to pay for that. Nothing personal. Speaking of which, I would say go check out Buy Me a Coffee for this reason. I found an old video that took all of my travel tips and it summarized them. When Patreon shut mine down, the travel tips were gone with the Patreon. And so before I forgot all the travel tips, I summarized them and I made them available on another avenue. I found that particular video and I made it available on Buy Me a Coffee, and it is entitled Summary of Travel Tips 2 through 9. I mistitled it. It should have been 2 through 8. My bad. You're going to have to subscribe to get that. Yes, it's worth it. With that being said, believe me, that particular one, Summer Travel Tips 2 through 9, is very helpful. Believe me, it is. You're going to want that. If you subscribe for only 1 month, that would be worth it. Now, moving on, I'm going to say this about the role that Islam has played in the Black manosphere and in red pill awareness in general. And then I'm out. I'm done with this after that point. When you look at the church and the blue pill simp message of the church, that was spread fairly easily through the church. Then the men became red pill aware and something happened. The church lost a lot of male membership over time because it was emasculating. Let's be honest. The Black church participated in the emasculation of Black men, and Black men said, never mind. We're done. Black men said, we're not going to listen to this stuff anymore. And there is, of course, the urban legend that may be true of a Black pastor that sat up in a Black church and asked the single moms to stand up, and then asked the single men to stand up and said, y'all need to be marrying these women. And a lot of the men just walked the uck out. No, I did not curse. It's Ramadan. And I shouldn't be cursing anyway, but I didn't curse this time. They walked the uck out of that church and left them single moms looking dumbfounded, and the pastor too. They said, no, you don't do that. So that means that they were not going to take this emasculation. The red pill awareness oftentimes does cause men to walk out of, whether they know it as red pill awareness or just common sense. However they understand this awareness in English or in any words of any language, it causes them to walk out of many of the churches. And pastors have had to stop to a certain extent. They've had to say, no, we can't continue preaching this. It ain't gonna work. Shouts out to pastors. That was sarcasm, by the way. What happened with Islam was this. I'm talking about Black Muslims. The men believed in a sense of responsibility and chivalry to the women. What's happened is that as soon as the men began to take it to levels of symptom, there was a pushback. As soon as this became something that was preached, there was a red pill aware preaching in the opposite direction. There are still men who are Black Muslim men trying to save the Black family. They're still there. Khalil Mu'minoon is one of them. Hats off to him for his intentions and for his efforts. Imam Luqman Ahmed of Ohio is another one. He has blocked me on Facebook, and I understand why he has done it. But that's not correct. I was right. I gave up on this notion that the Black family is going to remain intact in large part in the context of the West, because family's not going to, Black or white. And as we already know, when white folk catch a cold, we get pneumonia and the flu. We know this already, and guess what? It's happening on the continent too. So I'm going to tell you, Black folk, we are not going to save the Black family in the context of the West. And on the continent of Africa, the Black family is already in danger, because while the continent is largely, praiseworthily, justly and rightly so resistant towards the alphabet stuff and business, It is not resistant enough to feminism. I'm all for women being strong in terms of their capacity, but I'm not in favor of them having these nasty, defiant personalities towards men for the sake of it. Few of us are. But what has happened is that as these men have begun to preach, there have been other men that have sat up and said, well, we believe in the role of men, but you know what? There has to be something in it for us. I mean, you're not going to sit up here and tell me to be this hopelessly single, never going to get married young man, but I need to get out there and do security for the neighborhood and get out there on patrol. If I don't have a wife and children, I might volunteer to do such anyway. But if I cannot and I don't qualify to have a wife and children, then there is no mother cuss word way that I absolutely must be out there on security patrol at night in the neighborhood. Even if the area is largely Muslim. For what? If it's just to maybe become a martyr for somebody else's safety and security, and that's what I'm doing it for, okay, fine. I would volunteer for that if I'm going to do that. But nobody's going to come to me and say, listen, Tuesday is your night to do the patrol, but I don't qualify for marriage. I don't qualify, especially if it's for some materialistic reasons. And some men who would say to others to step up might even say, well, I didn't say that you were qualified or disqualified. It's between you and a lady and her father. If collectively all the ladies and their fathers are too materialistic, then what are you defending? You're defending a materialistic culture. And culture needs to have a balance of materialism, a balance of it, a correct amount. However, when it gets to the point that the normal man does not qualify to get married, then it doesn't work. And that's not a culture that's worth defending. I'm telling you now, that's one of the problems amongst Pakistanis. Marriage is too difficult. The weddings, forget the marriage, weddings are too expensive. And one of the things I would say is you don't have a culture that is worth defending. So if there is actually a Pakistani community inside of the UK, which there are, or inside of the States, which there aren't really, I mean, like in terms of zip codes where you're the majority, since these things don't actually exist in the States, it's maybe a moot point, but your population, your community is not worth you defending. Your rights are. People's person may be. But the culture is not even something worth defending. And if all you're defending is that particular culture, then put a stop to your defense. Because you got shut out and disqualified because of your normality. So I would say this to you too. You got men over here where I live that sit up and say, I don't know any woman protection except my sister, my mothers, and my wife, and my daughters. Now, generally speaking, men here have been quite chivalrous. One man was about to beat the snot out of me because he thought I was harassing my wife. Now, that would have been dangerous for both of us, especially for me. He was younger and stronger than I am. I'm sure he was faster, too. And I got a bad back. But it would have been dangerous for both of us. However, and to be honest with you, when I heard my wife say to him, no, he's my husband, I didn't know what he said to her. I couldn't understand it. I don't speak Egyptian. But when she said to him, no, he's my husband, then she turned to me and said, he thought you might be harassing me. And then I explained to him in actual Arabic, well, thank you for being willing to protect my wife. I appreciate that. Truth be told, I'm not harassing her, but I do flirt with her in public. I don't care. I told him, yes, in public, I will flirt with her. Later on, I said, thanks again for being willing to protect my wife. I appreciate that. And he was nice about it. And he said, gladly, my friend, gladly. Now, his intention would have been dangerous towards me because of his lack of information, but I didn't take that personally. He meant well. That's chivalry. He's not responsible for her. But you know what, in all honesty, when I'm around here and these women that do beg show up and they're begging, I actually don't show up to give them aid. When the women that are here beg, I don't come around the corner and say, well, listen, look at this, take this, put this in your pocket, put this in your purse, get yourself somewhere safe. I don't do that. For one, I don't necessarily know if they're begging because I don't really know what that sounds like in Arabic when they're speaking quickly. But the other thing too is, you know what ain't my problem? Men cannot approach women in this society, which is okay. If she's at a booth, you can approach her business. I mean, a halal business, not nefarious things. If she's at a booth, like a phone booth or something in the mall, yeah, that's business. If she's at an information desk, you can approach and ask for directions. If she's related to you or y'all are married, you can approach. But just approaching a lady that's just because, just approaching a lady at random when y'all are outdoors walking about, that's not okay. And I understand that. But that means it's not okay for them to come and approach me about some money. And I don't even carry cash, but I definitely don't reach in my pocket at somebody else's request. I don't do that. I already know what that means. You have to look around you to be safe in order to do it. And then if you're looking around and you got the wallet in your hand, she could take it and take off running. And if I'm chasing after a woman in public, I might be stopped while she continues running, and I have to explain, dummy, she stole my wallet, you're letting her get away. So I already know, you know what? I've already thought these things through. And I don't accept a sense of guilt or responsibility, even during Ramadan, for that. Now, a lot of African-American Muslim men would say, bro, that's cold-blooded. Hey, look, she don't owe me nothing. I don't owe her nothing. This works both ways. The Western woman, Muslim and non-Muslim, taught me that. Especially the non-Muslim. But since you guys, some of the ones that are on the blue pill stuff, are quick to talk about what a woman doesn't owe any man, fine. It goes both ways. Fuck the shuck up. But what's happened is that in the Muslim circles, this has been, I can honestly say that blue pill simp chivalry, that exaggerated chivalry, has been curbed early on. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I'm saying it has been met and matched early on. And it's actually encoded. That's the thing. I am allowed to prioritize my wife, my mother, my daughters over other women. I'm allowed to. And I might have to. I can't sit up and say, while we do have some simp imams and simp dads, even in our religious population, I can't sit up and say that it's gone completely unchecked. There, from early on, there have been many Muslims that are African and African American, and they have made one thing clear. They don't mind being helpful to women or being nice or being polite, but they're not going to be taken advantage of. That's not happening. And in many ways, we were, because of what we were unaware of, but commensurate with our awareness, proportional to our awareness, we will not be taken advantage of and used. And I respect more of these men for that. I can honestly say that. We've had problems amongst the Muslim community as well, where a lot of the women have talked about what the men don't have and what they ain't providing. We've had that. We've had these conversations. You know what, though? Let me tell you something about those conversations. When they start talking like that, we've had some men that have jumped up and said, yeah, brothers got to be more responsible. And I've generally agreed men have to be responsible commensurate with their abilities. But I also had to stop and say, wait a minute. You do realize that righteous men are the ones that are the most tested with poverty the most often by God. You do realize it, right? They got to work the hardest for what they get. because we ain't allowed to lie and cheat. We're not allowed to delve in interest. We're not allowed to pay it, and we're not allowed to collect it. We're not allowed to spend it. You do realize that, right? So guess what the hell that means? We got to get out there and work hard for that money. Ain't nothing coming easy. And when I say this, when I explain this to some of these ladies, when I used to do so, I'm telling you now, they always had some pushback because they felt entitled to a certain level of material well-being. Failing to realize, you know what, here's a double standard for you. God has entitled husbands to a level of sexual well-being. He has not entitled husbands or wives to a level of material well-being. Now, he has stated that there are certain standards that a man has to meet for his wife, but those standards are not very high. They're not even above poverty. And the women have to accept that because a man may fall on hard times. God is likely to test with that. So that blue pill stuff, that's not going to be a justification amongst the Muslims. So I'm going to say that, you know, Christian and Muslim men that are black both can get credit for a red pill awakening. But I have to be honest, the Muslims came into that a bit early, or rather, I should say, they, as religious groups, I don't mean as regular individuals, but as religious groups, the Muslims tended to take that early on or earlier on and say, no, we're going to, nuh-uh. And one of the reasons is because the fairness and justice in it is inherent to our religion. It's like, no, this is what you don't get to do. You don't get to oppress. We don't get to oppress. No one does. So you're not going to sit up here and talk about, well, you ain't going to talk about what the man has to have, and you ain't bringing nothing to the table but a gut and other men's kids and a nasty, filthy, stink, funky attitude. And you don't listen to nobody, and can't nobody tell you nothing. Oh, don't get it twisted. They got Muslim women in the West, the U.S., black Muslim women that like to get them in and into fights too, book fights for their men and then check out. It's like they want their men dead or something. That exists there too. You got Muslim black women that they've been wanting dudes that got burners under the car seats. I mean, he could be Muslim, but he needs to have some tattoos of Allah's name on him. Have a burner under the back seat. It needs to have some bodies on it too, if the police ever find it and do a ballistics test. It's like that. Neck rolling, finger snapping. They think because they throw in a few Arabic words with they hood English, with they Niglish, that it's okay. Yeah, that does happen. And you know what? I can honestly sit up and say that a lot of Muslim men begin to get tired of that early on. And the evidence was this. Those were the brothers that been going to Morocco from the 70s and 80s getting married. That's them bros. They were the first ones doing it. They're pretty much saying, if you're going to have all this attitude, filthy, stink, funky, nasty attitude, and that's what you're going to bring to the table, but I got to be all this Superman to marry you, I'm going to go across. It's a 6-hour flight from New York. Ain't that mother cuss word long. I'm a grown man. I'm old enough to get married. I'm old enough to sit still on the plane for 6 hours. I'll get there. I'll meet someone. Get a fiance visa. She'll be over here with me in the States. And you don't hear about those marriages really didn't end, actually. That's one thing I will say. Now, I don't know what it's like now, but generally speaking, African Americans that married Moroccan women did move back to the States, and those marriages did last. I'll give them credit. That did happen. There was one such couple that used to babysit my daughter. The African American from New York. She was, I think, from Rabat. Yep. His son recently graduated. I forgot what his degree is in. So yeah, we've been putting that to good use. Absolutely. And you know what? Her sister wound up also marrying an African American brother. They're both in Atlanta, and their marriages have survived in Atlanta. What does that tell you? So the first African American Muslim brothers they were putting to, and I'm not saying they were calling it the red pill back in those days, obviously not, but the first ones putting to use what they knew were the ones that would go to Morocco and get married. That was them. The others were the ones that started going to Senegal. If you were really, fist in the air and you figured that Moroccan women ain't black enough, you went to Senegal or Gambia. Quite a few of those too. And they tended to go back and forth between the U.S. and Senegal. Know about them too. Some of the first of the passport brethren amongst African Americans, if you want to call them that, or rather SYSBM, were Muslims. Before it was called SYSBM, and a Muslim brother helped to co-write the tenets of it. Dwight Hayes, shout out to him. Assalamu alaikum, bro. Ramadan Mubarak, if you ever hear this. And if anybody knows where he is or how he's doing, y'all update me, please. I don't know I don't know what's going on. I can't find him. I'm kind of worried. Kind of is an understatement. I'm actually very worried. I fear the worst. So yeah, y'all, think of a code. But we're going to have to start putting some of these double standards, even though the double standards should only be because of other double standards and to counterbalance other double standards that were otherwise unbalanced. We still should take the double standards and put them up in their faces if you're going to have a conversation about it at all. And if not, you don't have a conversation. But if so, you put it up in their face and you say, you mother cuss word right. We can do this and you can't. Why? Because you ain't been doing nothing but talking junk all these decades about what you can do that we can't do. And eventually there's going to come a day when some women are going to say, well, you guys were right when y'all said that we screw who we want. You screw who you can. But you marry who you want. We marry who we can. Eventually they're going to say that. Don't even accept that don't accept that as something in their favor. Here's why. The reason for that is because all of those four statements are true except one. One of those is not. The other three are true. That one that is not true is men marry who they want. Old successful men marry almost who they want. But there are limits even then. And one of the reasons for that is because you live in a society where the fornication is easy. And what that does is that allows for women to more easily pick who they lay with. But even though they can't easily pick who they marry, they still have a control because it's expected that by the time you marry somebody, you done lay down with them. That's expected. It's not right. I'm just saying that's what's expected. And the women themselves don't want to lay down with a man that they don't want to marry a man they ain't laid down with already. So the ones that they would not lay down with are also the ones they won't marry unless they're old. Hey, look. Is that what men are looking to do? Is that what men are looking to marry? No. So men's marriage options are artificially limited there in the West where you are. Unless they're less limited here. Far less. I hope that what I've said is helpful and it is a benefit. Thank you for listening. And as always, Black Heart, Black Mind, Blackout, Assalamu alaikum. And thanks again to D. Smith for coming through. Triple digits. Thank you. And thank you all for flying with me on Jet Black Airways, where Jet Black is also a verb. I advise you all to get in on that first class. And gender justice forever.